Minister is ready. Minister, we're all set now.
Okay.
First of all, everyone, our apologies for the delayed start here. I mean, it's this old, anything that can go wrong will go wrong at the worst of times. This is exactly what happened this morning. We were just having some serious difficulty connecting to Facebook Live. Facebook somehow decided that it wasn't going to work this morning. So here's what we've done. We still have the minister with us. We're switched to YouTube, but we're sharing the link on Facebook so you can still follow it. Gives us a chance to just do it somewhat differently. Minister, first of all, thank you very much for joining us. And thanks everyone for being part of this plain speaking session and I'm sure she won't mind if I say the relatively new Minister of Tourism and International Transport for Barbados, Lisa Cummins. Relatively new because she was appointed in late July on or about the 23rd of July. And at the risk of sounding somewhat cliche here, she's hit the road running, hasn't she? She's been meeting with tourism businesses, attractions, the workers, you name it. She's been there outlining her vision for Barbados tourism. And she's also been overseeing the resumption of tourism activity. Well, thank you again, Minister, for accommodating us. Thanks for your patience and for accommodating us, because I know you've got Parliament this morning, so you had to work some sort of gymnastics to be here with us. And what happens on the day you do it, that's the day Facebook decided that it's going to mess up. But, you know, these things do happen. Now, we'll discuss the return of flights and stuff in a moment, but I'd like to talk to you about Barbados being a strong competitive force in global tourism market. You've talked about that. You said there are extensive plans for that. Talk to us a little, if you may, about those plans.
Thank you so much, Johnson, and to the entire CTO team for welcoming me, for having me this morning. I was saying to you just before we joined that this is perhaps the conversation all around the globe for persons who sit in the tourism chair for the moment. What are the plans for your competitive edge? What are the plans for resumption of travel? What are the visions that you have for the development of the industry? And I'm very pleased to be here this morning to be able to share just a few thoughts with you. So I think I want to start by saying, first of all, that tourism prior to February was on an upward trajectory in terms of our assessment of arrivals. We were looking at increasing flows in tourism investment inflows. We were looking at the increases in employment across the sector, and we were looking at expansion into new markets. And then January, February unfolded in a way we could not have anticipated. And here we are now in September, and we're still having a conversation, obviously, about how things have changed significantly. And so I think that is perhaps one of the driving factors in determining how we are able to position our own countries for competitiveness in a new environment, in a post-COVID environment, and an environment where we've seen significant unemployment levels spiking over the last few months and travel having ground to a halt. So what does that mean? So in a Barbadian context, it means that we have started to look very significantly at our product itself. What was the product we had on the market prior to February, prior to COVID? What were some of the areas that were always going to be in need of a refresh and a reimagination and a repositioning? What are our markets, the markets that we have historically been working very closely with? Is there an opportunity for us to push even further in those markets? And but also at the same time, should we also have been looking at new markets? And if so, what are those new markets? We have been having those conversations. On the ground, in terms of destination management, we've been spending quite a significant amount of time, as you alluded to earlier, meeting with the attractions, meeting with the tours, looking at our tourism product and attempting to rationalize not just how we position the product, but going on the back end of those businesses to inbuild new business models, to inbuild resilience planning, to inbuild business continuity. And I can't help but say that my own background as a trade specialist, I have to be using that as well. So we have been looking at the value chain for tourism. Tourism, as you know from almost every study, is deeply vertically integrated into the wider economy. It is a driver of direct and indirect employment, and value creation. And so we have been looking at deepening the linkages through structural reforms as well as institutional measures into agriculture, into manufacturing, where in Barbados in particular, it has not been strongest, and certainly expanding the reach into services. And that then gives us a platform into our export market for our goods and services using our tourism product. So that's really just a helicopter view of some of the key things that we have been looking at over the past few weeks.
Now, you've talked about a reimagined tourism product on the horizon for Barbados. You said that at a Together Again event that was hosted by the Barbados Conference Services Limited. Help us, if you may, imagine this reimagined product.
Well, you may have to wait a little bit longer to see the reimagined product, because we don't want to preempt what we're going to be bringing onto the market. But what I can say is that we've been using what we have been seeing in other sectors of the economy. And I give the example of the retail sector, and I use it with our own teams very often. We've said that technology has been a significant disruptor of retail activity in a way that we had not anticipated before. And so long before there was COVID, you were seeing flagship major in the way in which they did business. Many of them were closing their brick and mortar facilities and being driven largely by online purchasing and online retail opportunities. And then of course the e-commerce frameworks that go along with them. And so we went into COVID with many of our brick and mortar companies still in the Caribbean, depending on foot traffic moving into our facilities. And COVID forced many of them, in order to maintain some level of revenue, to go online and to maintain a virtual presence. We are rationalizing and reimagining what it means for Barbados to also be able to function in this disruptive technology environment in the same way that retail has done it, tourism has to do it. How do we sell our products and our services in this disruptive environment? How do we leverage technology? How do we use innovation? How do we bring in new entrepreneurs who are having, startups and spin-off companies that are completely innovative? How do we use the tourism sector as an anchor for this kind of virtual activity? And you'll see more of that in the coming months.
Now, you're also Minister of International Transport, and so in speaking about transport, and I believe it was this agreement with Inter-Caribbean Airways, who, by the way, will be among the panel tomorrow for our live discussion on connecting the Caribbean. You said that international transport is the plank on which tourism is built. Expand on this theory, if you may.
So, if we talk about tourism, we can think about it in two broad categories. There's a domestic tourism. So we are all tourists in our own country. So we're visiting our own attractions at home and experiencing the restaurants and so on. But we have the international tourist who happens to also be dependent on travel. If an international tourist is unable to take advantage of either an aircraft or a cruise ship to be able to experience the tourism product across borders in a physical way, then the tourism product doesn't happen. And we've seen this, and we've seen it from the UN World Tourism Organization and all the data that has come out, where the cessation of flights and cruises has had a significantly dampening effect. In fact, in most instances, a destructive effect on the tourism sector, as people have not been able to move. And so for international transportation, that becomes absolutely a plank. And so one of the strategic objectives for us as a ministry is very much to forge those linkages in international transportation. Again, in the same way we've done it for tourism, we're doing it for international transportation. What are the existing routes? And I'll give you an example. During the immediate lockdown, post-lockdown period, we had flights coming to Barbados bringing some medical support by way of nurses. That flight flew directly from Accra in Ghana, 9 hours into Barbados directly. Under normal circumstances, our routes would take us from the African continent through Europe and then from Europe into the Caribbean. Are we using the relationships that we have with negotiation of air services agreements, finding new transportation routes, and building new partnerships to open up new routes for international transportation? In the Caribbean region, we've had, of course, the challenges that we've seen over the last few months with regard to the LIAT 1974 company, and we've seen other entrants now coming into the market. Inter-Caribbean began flights into Barbados on August 4th, and then we have seen One Caribbean entering thereafter. both carrying 30-seater planes so far, but looking to address the challenges of interregional transportation. How are we going to get our people moving throughout the Caribbean? How are we going to get cargo and our services to give effect to the CSME moving through the Caribbean? And so transportation and tourism are very much linked, but transportation and business are also intimately connected, and we're interested in ensuring that we have that reimagined platform that gives us the plank that you made reference to in the opening of your comments.
Yeah, but you talked though of LIAT, and so I'm going to bring that in right there because you know it's been the carrier that has helped connect the Caribbean, if you may, helped connect a lot of people from the international destinations and serve Barbados well as something of a major hub in there. For all intents and purposes, at the very least, it is somewhere between mostly dead and purgatory. And there are new carriers, obviously, that are showing up, but they certainly can't or aren't connecting the way LIAT does. So are we in a situation where we're going to see reduced connection in the Caribbean and Barbados' position as that hub being impacted?
I think that we have to be contextual about this discussion. I think that COVID and the lack of reopening in some countries and in some markets with regard to airports is going to have an impact on what we see now. And I'm not certain that in a pre-COVID environment where LIAT, as it then stood, was flying regular flights, connecting flights out to Barbados in the south and Antigua in the north, that you're necessarily in that environment now. So as countries continue to reopen their borders, as airports continue to increase the number of flights that they're willing to receive on a daily and a weekly basis, you will see the connectivity issues attempt to resolve themselves with increasing airlift and with the increasing numbers of flights on various carriers. And so I expect that during the course of the coming weeks and months, as the situation, I'm hoping, evolves and we're able to better manage the COVID situation in terms of imported cases, that we are in a position to see the airlift throughout the Caribbean to ensure that we have interconnectivity throughout the Caribbean region return to some level of near normalcy, even if not normalcy. But I think that the context is important for us to bear in mind.
Now, before we came on live, we were having quite a discussion, weren't we, on some of the pronouncements that were made by the Governor General in the throne speech, yes. and where this has brought Barbados as a destination and as a brand. Share with us some of your thoughts, if you may.
So our Prime Minister has used the term that I think is perhaps most apt. She calls it taking fresh guard. And taking fresh guard simply meant that, it meant many things, but in this context, it also meant that when this administration came to office in 2018, the circumstances at the time were extraordinarily challenging. We had a huge fiscal challenge. We then found ourselves in a position where within a month or so, we found ourselves having to default on our debt and then enter into a restructuring program. And we were, by January of this year, beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel and beginning to turn the corner. And then COVID struck. And so the mandate that was given to our administration in May of 2018 obviously had to be reconfigured and contextualized, and I use that word again, for the purpose of where we are now. And so our Prime Minister said she was taking fresh guard, and so you saw Parliament being prorogued, you saw the beginning of the opening of Parliament again with the throne speech and the announcements that were contained therein. For the purpose of tourism, though, the particular element that I would want to focus on is the announcement of our BEST program. It's Barbados it's an employee strategic program. Employees are going to be re-engaged, specifically focusing on the tourism sector. It is a $300 million investment in the transformation of the tourism sector, using a number of key platforms. One, worker training and transformation. We're putting a significant amount of resources into training the tourism worker, bringing them back at around approximately 80% of their pre-existing salary scale for the purpose of ensuring that we do not take unemployment levels even higher. We are going to be investing in aggressive greening and renewable energy programming, as well as digitization of the processes and the operations of our hotel properties. And of course, there is going to be the provision of financing to ensure that we keep our properties, in particular, many of our indigenous properties, afloat and supporting the balance sheet. So that was one of the most significant pronouncements for the tourism sector and an economic recovery program, because as you know, an investment in tourism triggers investment and economic activity in the wider economy. And so it really is ambitious. Really is ambitious.
And we probably are, I'm not quite sure if, yes, I think we're back here. Sometimes it happens, it's just probably not all day. You talk, there is something else that seems to have had quite a bit of interest, and that's this Barbados workation, if you may, as the term is evolving, which lots of other people have started advertising as well. How's that working?
Well, the Welcome Stamp, which is what we call it here, the Barbados Welcome Stamp, is meant to be a year-long program where persons who are in various categories, but they're not here to live for the purpose of taxation or anything like that, they continue as if they're working in their own country, but they're just doing it remotely from Barbados. And so we have been seeing a significant increase in the number of persons, both individuals and families, and now we're also seeing companies expressing an interest in having their employees work remotely from Barbados for the duration of this period. Now, I mean, the unfortunate challenge that we're seeing here is that for many of our source markets, we're seeing the second surge of the COVID wave sweeping through them, and they're really challenged by the reopening process at this stage. And so this is an opportunity again for them to work from a place like Barbados. We've been working with all of our partners to ensure that we have all of the infrastructure and the resources and the facilitation at the disposal of our partners, but for persons to be able to get the economies all around the world going again and being able to do so safely from a jurisdiction like Barbados. And I think the one thing I want to say here is that not just Barbados, but the Caribbean overall really has to be commended for being among the top countries in the world to have managed the COVID outbreaks, so that we are now in a position where many of us are welcoming people back to our shores, and we're doing so safely.
And I will get to that in a few moments, but how many, if you may, people have already been confirmed for this permit and who are here working?
Well, we actually have a follow-up meeting this afternoon, and so I will be in a position to share some more of the details. But in terms of the level of interest, what I can say to you, let me start with the interest levels first. We have been seeing active engagement on our social media sites in excess of 8 million hits already on our various sites. And we've already hit the 1 million mark in terms of those persons who are actually now beginning to have the payments processed into Barbados. So that will translate into individuals and companies and so on. So we're climbing, and we're now putting the measures in place to roll out the second wave of the Welcome Stamp initiative.
And there's something I saw a report recently that doesn't come up in this work thing, but students who university students,
yes,
these pupils also seem to be wanting to come here as well.
Yes, that's correct.
How would you have on that?
Absolutely. So we're seeing many subgroups, for example, and I mentioned, just so for clarity, we're not talking about 1 million persons, we're talking about the million persons, the million in terms of quantification of the payment that has been received so far, not the individuals.
We didn't think that Barbados could deal with an
No.
I
I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yes.
But and that's climbing. But yes, students, we're seeing students. Companies have been making contact with us, in particular those companies that are off particularly major extraction-based companies who may have families who their employees are working remotely and their families are with them, and they're not able to go home because the countries that they come from are now in either their second or in some instances their third wave. What do? They've been in the country where they're working and based for a really long time, which is longer than normal for many of them because they're used to coming and going frequently, and they want to give people a mental health break. And they're thinking, okay, would you be willing to let our families come to Barbados and stay there while their relative, their primary caregiver, is working remotely in another jurisdiction? And we're saying, absolutely, you can come and we'll facilitate that. So we're seeing students, we're seeing the digital nomads, we're seeing the companies, we're also seeing a lot of techies expressing interest in also working from here as well.
Now, I've got to raise it because I saw the Prime Minister this morning on the BBC. There seems to be a lot of interest again on this whole issue of the Republican status that came up. And as a tourism destination, I'm sure you're loving the PR that you're getting from all over the world on that. And the second issue that's been coming up a lot, less than the Republic certainly, is the whole issue of the rights of same sex. How much of a PR push are you getting from that? And what does that do to help transform Barbados' tourism?
I don't know if at this stage I would want to put a context on that for tourism purposes. I think certainly as a people, we've spent a significant amount of time talking about our national identity, talking about who we are as a Caribbean people of African descent and what our history has meant for our evolution. We've spoken a lot about the colonial period, the post-colonial period, the independence period, post-independence period. And now we're in what I would call the latest stage of our development as a people, or rather as a civilization. And I really would want to ensure that as we speak about issues specific to colonial past, and Prime Minister called it loitering on colonial premises, we now have to come to a phase where many of our children, I have a 21-year-old, many of us have teenagers and millennials for whom, the British monarchy is a distant part of their consciousness. It probably doesn't even register for many of them. They do recognize that we have a female prime minister, the first female prime minister. We have the second female governor general. We have strong, powerful, iconic figures that represent Barbadian and Caribbean civilization, and they see no reason why they cannot ascend to the highest office. And I think that part of our identity is a critical part of our development and our civilization, and it actually has to be a part of what we sell as Caribbean authenticity, Barbadian authenticity in this case, to the visitors who come to our country. This is who we are. We are a people who have evolved from a past, and this is where we are now, and this is where we are going. And that's what the Republic question is for me as a tourism minister.
I've got to talk about the reopening. You began receiving flights welcoming passengers again around the 12th of July. How has this been going since?
So we've actually, obviously, like every other country, had our challenges with the resumption of flights, in particular with regard to testing at the border and ensuring that tourism is conducted safely in collaboration and in partnership with our public health officials, who have been simply phenomenal. And so we're continuing that. We're expecting that during the course of October. So far, we have welcomed back British Airways, Virgin Atlantic, and JetBlue Airlines. And beginning in October, we will be welcoming back American Airlines. Between December and January, we should be welcoming back Copa, and we expect to be welcoming also Lufthansa during the course of the latter part of the year. So we are looking at how we gradually are able to resume some level of significant airlift coming into the country so people are able to travel.
Right now, about how many visitors have you had since the resumption?
We have had, I don't know if I would want to be able to put them into visitors alone, but we have had, in the initial stages in particular, a significant number of repatriation flights for Barbadian nationals who were stranded abroad. And so our early traffic really was about Barbadian nationals coming in. In the latter weeks or so, we have been seeing more traffic as visitors coming in particular in our luxury segment. So many people who, for example, are used to coming into Barbados for their winter season are now beginning to make their arrangements to travel in, to stay in their villas, to stay on the coast. And as more and more properties reopen, and we're expecting more properties to open in October, November, and then into December, we should not have any properties remaining closed by then. We expect the numbers to continue to increase.
The testing on arrival, the processing of passengers and all of that, I would expect as you do it a little bit more frequently, you become a little more efficient at it. But how has the process been?
It has not been without its challenges, and I think that is the case across the Caribbean and definitely across the world. But one of the things that we're very proud of is the fact that we're hearing in many of our source markets that there are challenges with people being able not just to get access to the test in the first instance, but able to get their test results back. And we're very proud here in Barbados that we still have an overnight wait time for test results. Our lab has simply been phenomenal. They have worked on a 24/7 basis. And for passengers arriving in Barbados, in particular those from medium and high-risk countries who do not come with a 72-hour valid PCR test, they are able to be tested on arrival here at the airport. A few seconds, I've done the test. It takes no more than a few seconds. Test, you go to a quarantine hotel overnight, you relax in your hotel room, have room service come in, not interact with anybody. And by the next morning, you're going to have your results back. And then we go from there. I think that has been, for a small country, a significant accomplishment. And we could not have done it without strong leadership from our Prime Minister.
You've seen that a number of countries, as they've reopened and as they've welcomed more and more people, the infection rate rises. We've seen the UK have put quarantine requirements on some of those. You've just mentioned quite a few of the flights that you expect in the coming months. How prepared are you to deal with the sudden rise in infections?
So thankfully, mercifully, Barbados has had 100% of our cases imported since we reopened our borders. And so we have not to date had any local transmission or community spread in the country. And that is, again, a testimony to the work of our public health officials at the border. And so there has to be something said for the importance of testing on arrival. And we have also introduced a mandatory retest after a 5-day period being on island, because you may not become symptomatic at the time. So that has significantly contributed to us managing the numbers. Now, in terms of our opening back up, the number of lifts, the number of flights coming in from our what we would consider high-risk destinations, there are ongoing discussions. And in the coming week, we hope to be able to announce a few new partnerships that will allow us to address the questions which you have raised, in particular out of the UK market.
Yes, therefore, and that's important. You've said since the reopening, you haven't had all of the cases that you've reported, imported cases that you've caught at the airport, so they are not into the community, and there haven't been any local transmission cases since July. So you want to keep that, certainly you and the health officials would want to keep it this way, wouldn't you? It does make sense to keep it this way. So what are you doing and working with health officials to ensure, or as best as you can, that you don't have that transmission from the visitor or Barbadian who lived abroad and who's returning to the locals?
So the protocols, and we actually issued new protocols over the weekend. They're updated every 2 weeks, or they're valid for 2 weeks, and then we assess where we are. We look at what the data has shown us, and then we make decisions on upgrading what the protocols are. And so what we are seeing in the last protocols that we issued on Saturday is an indication of what has been the data, what the data has shown us over the last few weeks. And so what we have seen is the following. One, testing at the airport is something that has served us well. The persons who are coming with a valid PCR test that has been done 72 hours prior to arrival, that has made a significant inroad into the process. Retesting persons who have been here, even after they come with a valid PCR test for 72 hours, then after 5 days of being on island, also captures those persons who may become positive during the course. And those three things together, alongside quarantining persons for a maximum period of 5 days in dedicated hotels where there's no interaction with locals. So you come directly from the airport to a quarantine hotel, you stay in the hotel, and only after you have been cleared, then are you integrated into the wider population. And that has been tremendously significant in terms of ensuring that we do not have local transmission. But what that means really, Johnson, to be quite frank, is that there's also a concern among travelers who have less than 5 days to conduct their business, and their business travelers and so on. So there's always that balance between the tourism component and the public health imperative. And I would have to say that so far, we have done a very good job of working together as a team and always finding that balance to accommodate the respective interests.
Now, talk of the protocols, initially it wasn't quite clear, certainly to me, whether or not you allowed flights from the US upon resumption. It seems a bit clearer now because the protocol says high-risk countries. I mean, is everyone welcome? It doesn't matter what part of the world that they come from, you just categorize them?
Well, the health officials have a methodology that they use to calculate based on the infection rate, population size, number of deaths, and so on, what is then categorized as a high-risk country. And it is on that basis that you then see countries being put in those categories. The challenge in terms of the US obviously was airlift, and specifically out of the northeastern corridor, the Miami and the New York airports, we needed to be able to rationalize what the airlift would like today. That's been the jet. But we are expecting in October, beginning the 8th of October, to resume flights on American Airlines coming in from Miami as well.
Okay, so the question to clarify, doesn't matter where you come from, as long as you can get here, we just categorize you depending on the country that you've come from, and you are dealt with accordingly. I know you've got to run, I know you've got to get to Parliament, but let me just ask this one about this CARICOM bubble that has been, it's sort of almost snuck in, if you may, without much fanfare. The number of the heads have agreed to have a bubble. How is this going, that Barbados is part of that, isn't it? How is this going to help if the intra-Caribbean tourism, especially at a time like this when it's needed?
So I think one of the key things here for the Caribbean is obviously that there has to be that harmonization. I am an unapologetic regionalist, and coordination and harmonization across the Caribbean community is really something that I believe passionately in. And that is, of course, the direction that our Prime Minister has always gone. And we would want to ensure that where there is a CARICOM bubble, that we are always in a position to develop transparent methodologies for the purpose of being able to assess what constitutes the bubble, effective information sharing, clear and timely coordination among the various entities. And this is going to be particularly important for the resumption of the cruise industry. For air travel, there's one element, but when you are on a cruise itinerary and you're moving from one port to another on multiple jurisdictions in the Caribbean, that level of Caribbean coordination in that bubble, as you have termed it, is really going to be critical. And I'm confident that the community understands all of the issues, understands the dynamics that are at play, and we have been working as a group to ensure that we're able to meet the respective standards for all of the countries that are included in the bubble.
Minister, thank you so much. We know, as we said, that you've got to rush to Parliament, and I promise you we're going to do this again. And the next time Facebook isn't going to mess up, so we're going to have all of the interaction with all of the people. But thank you so very much, and all the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure being here. I'm looking forward to speaking to you again soon.
Pleasure's mine. Bye-bye.
Take care.